Welcome back to the shop, guys. Today we're going to continue working on Project PP, also known as Project Polaris. And it's been a journey to get here, so all those are going to be linked in the video description down below, or you can see the previous video, which will be linked up here. And as you can tell, we have a lot of parts laid out in front of us, quite a bit to go through. We have some cleaning to do if we want to get that engine in place. So let's dive right in. Before we can get started on the reassembly of anything, we've got some heavy duty cleaning to do. If you guys remember, this piston looked like this. That was in the previous video. And that was, we had determined, caused by this seal. You can see that it's been torn up, so it ran real hot. But even worse, it did some damage to the cylinder. So we can see all that metal kind of on the sidewalls of the cylinder. Luckily for us, this cylinder is a cast cylinder, so we can probably get away with some heavy duty cleaning with some of this stuff. That's right, you can get this at your local parts store, or you can even get it at your local home hardware. Note though, guys, you're going to need some heavy duty gloves, you're going to need some glasses, and you're also going to need a respirator in order to clean this up. So I'm going to set up the camera. I won't be able to talk because I'm going to be wearing my respirator, but you're going to see all this metal just melt away. While we're waiting for that cylinder to do its bubble bath thing, we can carry on by installing the crankshaft into the crankcase. I've already gone ahead and done all the scraping, removing all the old silicone and the old RTV, as well as the old gaskets, and then I've gone ahead and cleaned it up in the Varsol tank. But now we can go ahead and apply a little bit of sealant around the base over here on either side, and then dropping the crankshaft in place. So let's do that. Okay, so we're just going to go all along the edges of this crankcase over here with a little bit of RTV. Now I apologize for the background noise, guys. My heater is kicking on from time to time and it's a little bit cold outside. Don't need to go too crazy here, guys. You don't want any of this stuff to make its way inside the engine. So just a nice little bead all the way around will do just fine. Okay, now we can take the crankshaft and we can drop it back in place. Just like that. Now the second bearing here on the PTO side will have a groove. Make sure that sits in there properly. And before we go any further, we also need to make sure we install our seals. So what I'm doing now is I'm just taking a little bit of grease and I'm lubricating the inside lip of the seal here to give it a chance to not tear up when we first start turning the engine over. Okay, so we're just going to lift the crankshaft ever so slightly out of its hole. And we're going to position one seal just like that in its groove. And now for the second one here. All right. Give that a quick rotate. Perfect. Everything's rotating just fine. We're going to add a little bit of RTV on the inside of this particular crankshaft, on the upper side, where the seals meet. Now we're ready to put the top half of the crankshaft, or the crankcase, over the crankshaft. Like so. Flip it over and get started on installing some bolts. One thing I like to do before installing these crank bolts is add just a drop of non-permanent Loctite, and then dropping the bolts in their home. So we're just going to cinch these down a little bit in a crisscross pattern. And we're going to torque these bolts to 22 to 25 foot-pounds. This is also a good opportunity to take a few minutes and wiping away all of this excess RTV on the side. Just makes it look like a cleaner job. So now let's take a look at that cylinder that's been bubbling away. Well, as you can tell, guys, it's looking a lot better. Still a little bit of metal there. We're going to have to continue with this a little bit, but we can still do the other cylinder while we wait for this one. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we're going to install the magneto. If you guys remember in the last video, I was talking about timing and how it's important to remember it. So I had made myself a couple of nice marks here. So it's going to be nice and simple. We're just going to run the cable through the hole here. Install our square grommet. It's kind of awkward being that it's square, but maybe this thing was made by SpongeBob. Almost there. And there you have it. We've got our SpongeBob grommet in place. Now we can go ahead and fasten our two screws holding the magneto in place. We're just going to put these in loose. We're going to rotate the whole magneto plate exactly where we want it, which is right there. We're going to torque those down to good and tight. There you go. Now we can move on to the cylinders. First thing we need to do is stuff an old rag down the cylinder here, and I'll show you guys why in a minute. But you don't want anything falling in to whichever cylinder you're working on, especially. Now the next thing we'll do, we're going to grab our piston with our bearing. Now I like to keep a jar of grease handy because everything that we're going to install from now on is going to have a little bit of lubrication on it, so that during the initial startup we don't seize anything up because it wasn't getting its oil right away. So a nice film of grease onto our wrist pin bearing. Slide it in place. Then we're going to move on to our piston. Now, Polaris is the one company that is a little bit different from the others when it comes to two-stroke technology. Their arrow points towards the magneto. Most engines, if you've ever taken a two-stroke apart, it points towards the exhaust. So why back in the day, I believe Polaris has actually changed that now in their newer engines, but why back in the day they would actually do this backwards towards I don't know. I mean, it's not really backwards, I guess. It's just it's different from everyone else. I mean, I guess it keeps everybody guessing and keeps everybody on their toes. But anyways, we're going to push this wrist pin into place, just like so. And this is where having the rag in place is important, because this little circlip can go flying and falling into the bottom. And if you can't fetch it out, guess what? You're taking all of that apart again. So I like to put these so that the clip itself, the opening, is either facing up or facing down. I don't like it facing either side, because as the piston goes up and down, it can stress out the pin or the clip. So we're just gonna, and there you go. That's all the way in, and make sure that that's all the way in, because you don't want this clip to ever come loose while that engine is running, because it'll cost you another engine job. A little bit of assembly lube on the piston skirt. It's going to help it slide into the cylinder. Next, we've got our gasket. And now we can go ahead, make sure our cylinder is clean, and drop it over the piston. And we slowly squeeze the rings into the cylinder. And guys, there's no easy way of doing this. You just got to kind of use your fingers. There are tools available out there. I've never had good luck with them, so I just do it with a bit of patience. There you go. There we go. Okay, so next thing we need to do is just install the washers on the base of the cylinder, including the nuts, and those nuts get torqued to 25 foot-pounds. You might be wondering what I'm using here, because I don't have a crow's foot or a torque extender. So what I'm using is just a bolt that I've locked up with an extra nut on a wrench. Interestingly enough too, if you use this at a 90-degree angle from either side, and you don't lengthen or shorten the length of your torque wrench, you don't have to make any extra calculations. Next up is the cylinder head gasket. We're going to put that on just like so, followed by the cylinder head itself. Now, I kept the nuts in place to try and maximize efficiency by knowing where the longer ones went. Now, granted, I can't actually do this with it, which would change the entire orientation of it. It wouldn't matter on the cylinder, but it would matter on the bolts. So I may be wrong with this, but I'm pretty sure I had the engine facing this way with my number 2 over here. Either way, these nuts get torqued to 17 foot-pounds. Okay, so we're going to repeat the same process for this cylinder. But before we do any of that, let's go take a look at that. And afterwards, we're going to move on to the stator. Alright, so look at that, guys. All the metal is gone in the cylinder. Yes, it's still got a couple of scratches. Nothing too deep, however. They're just surface scratches. So they're actually going to clean up really well with a stone hone, which is what I'm going to do next. Then after that, I'm going to give it a good bath before I reinstall it. But I'm going to skip all of that because that might be a little bit boring. So this is what the cylinder looks like after about 5 minutes of honing, guys. Again, you got some cross hatching you can see there in the cylinder. It's really looking pretty good. I mean, I'm pretty happy with this. That little bit of scoring you see there is very, very minor. It's not going to affect the performance of this at all. I mean, we're not going racing anyways, so it's going to run just fine and for a long time. So let's put it back together. Now that we have both cylinders buttoned up, torqued, installed, we can move on to installing the flywheel and the bridge and putting on all the rest of the panels. One thing we can't forget though is these 2 oil lines that go at the bottom of the cylinders. So we're going to do those right now. And it would be a good time to inspect these as well to make sure they don't need to be replaced. These are in good shape, so they're going to stay. Now we can move on to our bridge cover here. Next up is our flywheel, making sure our keyway is still in good shape. And be careful with this flywheel, guys. Quite powerful when it comes to magnets anyways. So don't pinch your fingers. And don't force it on either. As you saw, it just kind of went in place nicely. We're going to tighten up this nut. Don't have to have a huge amount of torque there. That is going to be followed by our fan. And lastly, we're going to have our recoil housing. And I think just for fun, we're going to put on our recoil assembly and perform a quick compression test. Okay guys, let's start with the bad cylinder. This was the one over here. Let's throw our gauge on there. We're going to grab our makeshift rope puller. Actually, this would have been a good time to put our new handle on, but we got no time for that. We want to see, did that do any difference? Ready? Let's do some pulls. 3 big pulls here. Oh, okay. Already looking pretty good. Good, we have to hold. There's 1, 2. Oh no. Kind of figured out what happened. And 3. Alright, what do we have? we've got about 95 psi. Not bad, because I can't hold this engine down to give it a good pull. So I'm going to say that that's looking better already, without even breaking anything in. I'm very happy with that. Now let's see what this one has. Now, if I was really ambitious, I'd bolt this plate back on and figure out a way to attach it to my, working table, but I'm too much in a hurry. I want to see what this puts out. So this one here, if I remember correctly, wasn't putting out as much. It was 75 pounds, and that was pretty much because everything was binding up on the opposite cylinder. If you guys remember, I had to hammer out that piston pin. It was nasty. So let's try this again. 3 big pulls. Same thing, we got some compression and catches right there. And that's 3. And we got about 85 pounds. So that's not bad. Lower than I expected, mind you. So we're going to revisit this again once it's inside the frame of that sewing machine to see if I can give it a good pull and see if the numbers rise. But I still think that it's going to run. Pretty confident in that. Just like the last test, we're going to do 3 pulls. So we've got 120 on this side. 3 more pulls here. Not sure if that was really accurate, because the first one kind of missed a little bit, but we're at about 120 again. So until next time, guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. Hope that you found it instructional at the very least, or entertaining. If you did, you guys know what to do. So until then, we'll see you next time.